Okay, welcome to the deep dive. Our mission is, well, pretty straightforward. You bring us some really interesting source material.
And we dive in, we pull out the key insights, the stuff that jumps out.
Exactly. The things you need to know to really get a handle on a topic fast. And today, you've given us something pretty compelling.
Definitely.
We're diving into a text called the Palantir Canon. Now, this source, it calls itself a mapped detonation.
A mapped detonation of an alleged global control system. That's the claim.
Right. It presents this system like a pyramid, built in layers, lots of secrecy.
And the core idea in the text is that this pyramid is now, quote, falling in degrees.
Falling in degrees. And the Palantir Canon, this source text, it claims to decode this whole thing across what it calls 33 engineered degrees of domination.
That's the number it uses, yeah, 33 degrees.
So for this deep dive, our mission is really to unpack what this specific text is claiming. We're focusing on those first few layers.
Degrees 0 through 3.
Yeah, 0 through 3. And we'll pay close attention to the role Palantir allegedly played in all this, according to the source. It's quite a central, almost paradoxical role presented here.
It really is. And the source frames it not just as some theory, but as, decoding something that's actively happening.
It's a unique perspective, definitely. An audacious one, you might say, on power, on systemic change, all based on this document we're looking at.
So where do we start? Degree 0 seems logical. The source calls it the foundation of the reversal.
Okay, degree 0 foundation. The source lays out this idea. Power structure, secret pyramid, and it's being dismantled. But not randomly.
No, precisely. In degrees, as the text repeats.
And those 33 engineered degrees of domination, that map starts here.
And right away, the source puts Palantir at the very center of this alleged reversal. It claims Palantir started as the digital apex of the surveillance system.
The top of the surveillance pyramid, basically.
Right, which was then, and this term is critical in the source, flipped.
Flipped. That's a strong word. And the source claims this flipping. It didn't start with, bombs or fighting.
No, it started with what the source calls legal warheads.
Legal warheads. Dramatic phrasing. Described as coded acts of silent rebellion, supposedly started by Donald Trump.
And the text gets very specific here. It names 3 executive orders, calls them the Trinity of Capture.
The Trinity of Capture. Okay, let's look at these through the source's lens. First one, EO 13818, December 2017.
Right. The source claims this basically flipped a switch, activated a kind of wartime legal state, but without, declaring actual war.
And its function, allegedly.
Asset freezing. For anyone involved in human rights abuses or corruption. And the text stresses foreign or domestic.
So potentially bypassing normal courts, the source calls it a sort of lawful seizure.
That's the term used. The implication is a tool for secret, swift asset seizure, created legally.
Okay, then the second one, 13848 from 2018.
On the surface, this was about election security. That's how it was presented.
But the source claims different purpose.
Yeah, it alleges the real function was a surveillance override. Meaning it supposedly allowed monitoring of any, quote, node touched by foreign interference.
Yeah.
And the examples given are broad.
Like NGOs, media, universities.
Even private equity, yeah.
Yeah.
The source's argument is that under the cover of election security, a huge surveillance net was cast over domestic groups potentially linked to foreign influence.
Okay, and the third one, EO 13959. The source says this came after the 2020 election, uses the phrase post-2020 election theft optics.
Right. This one targeted Chinese military firms that were embedded in U.S. finance.
And the source sees this as
the beginning of the financial untangling.
Yeah.
Specifically between Wall Street, Harvard, and the CCP. It connects this to the bigger alleged capture operation. Financial ties were apparently a key target.
So these 3 EOs together, the source argues they weren't just policies.
No, the claim is they created a whole new legal architecture, and this architecture was the trap.
A legal trap designed to catch people within the existing system.
That's the assertion. And right at the core of this alleged trap, the source talks about a mirror system.
A mirror system, what's that?
Supposedly hidden beneath the regular digital world, recording everything, routing it through AI.
And the crucial part.
Legally tagging it for future prosecution based on those EOs.
And the source says Palantir was this mirror.
Explicitly. Palantir was the mirror. And this mirror, initially part of the system, was allegedly infiltrated or flipped in 2020.
By white hats, the source calls them.
Yes, so that's the absolute core claim of Degree Zero. The system's own surveillance tool was allegedly turned back on itself.
But the source also mentions something symbolic needing to happen first, before Palantir was fully turned.
Right. It points to the, quote, fall of Harvard. Not just a university issue, but the source frames Harvard as the ritual gate to elite legitimacy in this supposed system.
So what happened at Harvard, according to the text?
It lists things like Drew Faust stepping down, called asignal audits, supposedly showing ties to CCP-link investment vehicles, faculty scandals, donations drying up.
And the source frames this as intentional, a planned dethroning.
Exactly. To expose and discredit what it calls the false priesthood of the elite. And it emphasizes Trump's EOs were active. Palantir was allegedly watching all this unfold.
Okay, so after this symbolic fall, the alleged flipping of Palantir becomes more active.
That's when, according to the source, Palantir gets pulled right into the operational center during COVID through a partnership with HHS called Protect Now.
And this partnership gave it access.
Massive access, the source claims. Real-time hospital data, supply chains, vaccine logistics, even behavior compliance metrics. A backdoor into all these connected institutions.
But the source argues Palantir's real job during COVID wasn't just tracking supplies.
No, the claim is much bigger. It was allegedly tracking narrative synchronization, modeling how populations reacted, studying truth breakthrough points.
Truth breakthrough.
Yeah, moments where the official narrative maybe faltered, and even, the source disturbingly claims, preparing for full cognitive collapse.
Wow. So this connects back to the flipping.
Directly. The claim isn't that the White Hats destroyed Palantir. They allegedly entered it, flipped its function.
So Palantir became a witness.
The witness system, yes.
Yeah.
Not just collecting data passively, but actively recording alleged crimes in real time under legal authorization, tying it back to those Trump EOs.
And the source lists examples of what this flipped Palantir supposedly watched.
It does. Election tampering, NGO money laundering, how ESG scores were enforced, digital censorship, deals to suppress pharmaceuticals.
The text says every click, every email, every transaction.
A bold claim. The flip mirror was watching and allegedly tagging everything as evidence.
So Degree Zero concludes how?
With the assertion that when Trump left office in 2021, the system described by the source was already captured.
Not just a transition, but a counter-capture operation.
That's exactly how the source frames it. The most sophisticated counter-capture operation in modern history, built on the legal and digital groundwork laid by those EOs and the alleged flipping of Palantir.
Okay. That's a lot to unpack for the foundation. Degree Zero sets the stage. Now, Degree One, the source calls this one the useful pawns.
Yes, the useful pawns, described as the first casualties, the disposable frontline.
Who are these pawns, according to the text?
Think visible figures. Local officials, maybe,
Yeah.
prosecutors, DEI officers, COVID health directors, school board members. The source labels tyrants, compliance people, activist mayors.
The public faces.
Right. The source frames them as psychological firewall, nodes in the system, scripted, programmed, and ultimately expendable.
What was their function, allegedly?
Tactical, according to the source.
Right.
Deployed strategically to shape beliefs, enforce the narrative locally, and importantly, absorb the first wave of any public pushback.
The visible priesthood of experts, the text calls them.
Exactly. And the big reveal from Palantir's data, supposedly.
What did it allegedly show?
That these weren't thousands of independent actors. The source claims they were embedded behavioral operatives, using synchronized language matrices.
Meaning they were all saying the same things.
Essentially, yes. Receiving identical instructions, the source claims, from places like WHO alliances, NGOs, open society templates. The conclusion drawn is they were installed for obedience conditioning.
But it often looked decentralized, right? Like local decisions.
That's what the source calls the optics of decentralization. It looked organic.
But Palantir's simulations allegedly showed
Something else. Sequenced deployments of nearly identical mandates. DEI pushes, pronoun policies, COVID rules, purges, rolling out across very different places, often within a very tight time frame, like 72 hours, the source claims.
So the simulations supposedly exposed the coordination.
That's the argument, behind the appearance of local control.
And the behavioral analysis. What did that allegedly find?
Predictable triggers, training on how to handle backlash, campaigns that frame dissent as violence, inverted morality, the source calls it, internal scripts for media.
So the whole point of this pawn layer was confusion, division.
To act as a firewall, yeah. Confuse and divide the population, according to the text.
The source also mentions Palantir recording a fatigue curve. What's that about?
The idea presented is that the constant contradictions and confusion weren't accidental. They were meant to train the public to accept cognitive dissonance, to basically wear people down and fracture social coherence as a function.
This whole layer, the source frames it as warfare, right?
Fifth-generation warfare, yeah.
Right.
The battlefield is narrative, the weapon is consent. Pawns are the first wave.
And Palantir simulations allegedly mapped the psychological impact.
Emotional erosion, rage loops, shame triggers, crisis fatigue, all deliberately induced, the source claims.
What happens to these pawns eventually, according to the source? It mentions ritual burnings.
Yeah, not literally burning, but being discarded. When they're no longer useful, erased from the story, quietly removed.
Reassigned, resigned with pensions.
Absorbed into nonprofits, yeah. The source is blunt. They are not protected, they are used. The core idea here is that they thought they were building something good.
But we're actually building a cage.
That's the source's framing, and then there are the behavioral holograms.
What does that mean?
Palantir allegedly mapped this deep mimicry. Identical statements, copy-pasted language everywhere, predictable behaviors.
Like performative governance.
Ritualized control through performative governance, yes. And the disturbing claim is that the public started imitating the pawns, a mass ritual rehearsal of obedience to unreality. Control wasn't just belief, but behavior.
So how does degree 1 connect to the reversal if Palantir is flipped?
The claim is Palantir isn't just simulating anymore. It's recording this engineered behavior.
As evidence.
Exactly. The metadata, the synchronized language, the timing, the comms is allegedly being used now.
Right.
In sealed indictments, military tribunals, judicial review panels, contractor fraud investigations, the source claims.
So the firewall that protected them
is crumbling, according to the text, because the data exposes the engineered nature of it all. Degree 1's performance becomes evidence against them.
Okay, that's the front line. What's behind them? Degree 2, the institutional armor.
Right. The layer behind the pawns, the invisible hands, foundations, unions, think tanks, advisory groups.
The exoskeleton, the source calls it.
Yeah, a sprawling lattice designed for narrative entrenchment and ritual protection of power. Camouflage units, essentially.
And the title for this section in the source is interesting. Power laundered through kindness.
That's the core claim, that the system's ideology, its control mechanisms, were deliberately wrapped in nice-sounding language. Altruism, humanitarian progress, social justice.
Hiding the intent behind benevolence.
Precisely. Creating empires of protection under that guise.
Does the source give examples?
It does. It alleges the Ford Foundation ghost-authored K-12 curricula, claims the Rockefeller Foundation crafted policy templates for things like climate IDs, vaccine passports, ESG frameworks, says Open Society Foundation seeded DA campaigns.
So these weren't just funders.
The source calls them the authors, a distributed priesthood writing the scripts for the Degree 1 pawns.
But it looked like lots of different groups working independently.
An illusion, the source claims. It calls it invisible nodes, global script. Palantir allegedly showed deep connections.
How so?
Think tanks citing each other constantly. NGOs recycling the same points. University centers funded by the same pools getting ghost-written content.
So the documents showed coordination.
Mass synchronized rituals, the text says. Same content rolled out globally, often within that same 72-hour window we saw with the pawns. This layer provided the script.
This layer also involved legal wording spells? What are those?
Basically the legal architecture they created. Contracts and policies designed to protect the pawns and the system's goals, not necessarily truth or legality. Templates for restorative justice, allegedly meant to lower prosecutions. Equity compliance rules forcing conformity for funding. Model legislation creating tripwires around speech, parental rights, autonomy. Palantir supposedly showed law firms distributing these prepackaged legal tools to rewrite the system's language.
And the output is described as sacred bureaucracy.
Yeah, policies and papers treated like scripture, wrapped in language of concern, climate plans, inclusion policies, but allegedly functioning as emotional enforcement tools for compliance. Bureaucracy as a control mechanism with almost religious authority.
This layer also allegedly targeted science itself, the false clergy of science.
Right. The claim is peer-reviewed papers became like sacred text to justify policies. But Palantir's models supposedly showed.
Showed what?
Journals funded by the same nonprofits writing the policies. Policy briefs drafted before the research was done. Scientists rotating through boards tied to these groups.
So consensus was manufactured.
The source claims it was a small group of credentialed zealots controlling the narrative, weaponizing peer review to silence dissent.
And the source says Palantir detected the ritual in all this.
Yes, the mirror detected ritual. It wasn't just connections, but the timing. Media rollouts right after NGO studies, policy shifts after think tank papers, ESG, SOGI, DEI standards appearing on identical schedules globally.
Not just coordination, but ritual precision.
A liturgical flow, the source calls it. Global psychological coordination masked as carrying infrastructure. The timing allegedly gave away the game.
And the source claims Palantir exposed the intent behind it all, what the architects feared most.
Yeah. That the outcomes, collapsing prosecutions, overloading education, saturating ESG weren't accidents or incompetence.
But deliberate, structured dissent.
That's the claim based on the AI simulations mentioned in the source. That these Degree 2 actors weren't just bystanders, they were the conductors orchestrating this decline.
So how does this institutional armor break down, according to the text?
It turns to shrapnel. The protective structures become the targets. Lawsuits using EO-derived evidence. FOIAs tracing the money, guided by Palantir's mapping. Legal teams using the behavioral mimicry patterns as proof of coordination.
So Palantir acted like a scanner, finding weak points.
Exactly. Exposing a mechanical priesthood. The armor is tagged, intent recorded, tribunals waiting. That's the source's narrative. The shield of legitimacy becomes their undoing once the alleged coordination is revealed. Which leads us logically to Degree 3. The media priesthood.
The voice of reality, the scribes of consensus, the myth makers.
According to the source, this wasn't independent journalism. It was a clergy of captured minds, performing ritual.
The high priests who consecrated narratives, ruled belief, sanctified lies, burned heretics.
Ruling via suggestion, shame, repetition, acting in unison. Manufacturing culture, that's the picture painted. Media not as reporting, but as ritual control.
The source calls it the broadcast cathedral. What does that mean?
It's about the rhythm, the synchronization,
Yeah.
not diverse content. Palantir allegedly tagged harmonic clusters.
Identical phrases.
Yeah, identical phrases, talking points, emotional framing, appearing across continents.
Yeah.
NPR, MSNBC, Guardian, Atlantic are mentioned as examples. Time to steer perception.
Tracking terms like deadly misinformation or safe and effective.
And behavioral nudges within the broadcasts. The source argues it wasn't a mirror of reality, but a global megachurch, each outlet playing its note in a coordinated chorus.
And within this cathedral, fact-checkers and the New Inquisition.
The claim is they weren't neutral arbiters, they were doctrinal enforcers.
Palantir allegedly exposed their funding, their data streams.
Ties back to Degree 2 NGOs, intelligence networks, shared back-end data, dictating what to debunk, interfacing with DHS, CIA, big tech via moderation portals. That's what the source alleges.
So they didn't analyze, they excommunicated.
Digital ash, ended careers, vanished channels, no appeal. The new Pharisees, the source calls them, needing new talking points weekly. Truth wasn't found. It was enforced by this alleged network. And their core function was gatekeeping. The gatekeepers of perception.
Controlling the Overton window, yeah. Palantir's Sims allegedly showed opinion wasn't organic, but algorithmically induced, amplified by media.
Editing memory. Manufacturing virtue through shame.
That's the claim. Not informing, but training people through subtle trauma loops. Fear, relief, allegiance, division, daily panic, monthly ritual. Media as a mass conditioning engine.
And the source connects the anchor and the algorithm. Legacy media and big tech.
Directly intertwined, the text alleges. Shared moderation portals. Real-time blacklists, amplification for compliant narratives, a collusion ritual.
Media generates the point, tech enforces it, fact-checkers sanctify it, public doesn't see the machinery. That's the alleged system. Media control was technological and systemic. The source even calls some content psyops as sermons.
Military-grade psyops presented as opinion or news.
That's the allegation. Russiagate as belief conditioning, COVID theaters behavioral control, certain gender narratives as a destabilization wedge, climate narratives to normalize central planning.
All framed as compassion, but enforced.
And broadcast by priests who, the source claims, didn't even write their own sermons, but received them from lower layers. Sophisticated manipulation disguised as commentary.
What about dissent? Heretics for the fire.
Punishment for deviation was severe, the source claims. Whistleblowers, independent journalists, citizen researchers, treated as digital witches.
Palantir traced the takedowns, coordinated hits, deplatforming bot campaigns.
That's the claim. Lost reputations, income, lives. Degree 3 demanded loyalty. And the source says Palantir, the mirror, reflected this media mirror too.
And the mirror reflects the mirror, yeah. Allegedly indexing internal comms coordination with Intel. Editorial notes with political talking points, cross-platform patterns revealing state influence.
Connecting it to Trump calling media the enemy of the people.
The source argues he was being precise, describing their alleged function within this system. The system's reflection exposed its own alleged manipulation.
So what's happening now to this media priesthood, according to the source?
The collapse of the cathedral. Palantir allegedly destabilized the whole thing.
We see ratings drops, people leaving.
Visible signs, yes, but the source claims deeper actions based on the data. Sealed indictments from comms, subpoenas showing state debt coordination, data models for tribunals alleging media collusion during emergencies like COVID.
So they're no longer untouchable. Can't hide behind the First Amendment.
That's the argument in the text. They were allegedly narrative executioners and now face consequences. Exposure leads to downfall.
Which leads to from belief to backlash.
The trust allegedly weaponized against people becomes their curse. Headlines aren't automatically believed anymore. Alt media fractures the narrative control. Podcasts, forums, whistleblowers gain influence.
The ritual's broken, the spell undone.
And the priests are being summoned to account. That's the source's claim. The control mechanism backfired, fueling distrust.
So to sum up these first layers from the Palantir Canon, degrees 0 through 3 pull back the veil on this alleged architecture of illusion.
Right. Laws rigged for a trap. Minds trained via psyops. Institutions weaponized to script compliance, media consecrating it all. The priesthood of perception.
And with Palantir allegedly flipped, the mirror cracked, the mask slipped, the pyramid falling layer by layer, exposed by its own data, according to the source.
And the source hints at what's next. Degree 4.
The financial cathedral, saying, the money shaped your world. The vault was the altar.
Implying the next layers, 4 through 6, get into the real machinery. Contracts, currencies, corporations.
The things that allegedly fed the whole pyramid. They claim to have broken the ritual of perception.
And now they're following the money. Literally.
So that was our deep dive into the claims made in these initial layers of the Palantir Canon. We covered the alleged foundation in degree 0, the flipped Palantir.
The useful pawns in degree 1, their synchronized behavior mapped.
The institutional armor of degree 2 providing the scripts and protection.
And the media priesthood of degree 3, the alleged engine of narrative control.
And it's crucial to remember, this specific source presents this not as just theory, but as its decoding of a planned, documented dismantling process, using the system's own tools against itself.
So, thinking about all this, what does this perspective presented in this source actually suggest? Maybe consider how interconnected things we usually see as separate, law, tech, institutions, media might allegedly be.
Right, and what if they really are, as this source claims, part of one single collapsing system? What would that mean?
Or, thinking about those upcoming degrees, what other hidden layers might exist? Especially if the deepest control, as hinted, really is tied to finance.
It's definitely provocative material you brought us. We encourage you, the listener, to think about the specific claims laid out in this text, their potential implications, because the source suggests this is just the start of what it has to reveal.